After one of the most destructive wars in human history, Europe was in ruins. Cities were reduced to rubble. Industries had collapsed. Millions of people were struggling just to survive. Food shortages, unemployment, and uncertainty were everywhere. It wasn't just a physical collapse. It was economic, political, and social. And then came a plan. A massive financial program led by the United States, promising billions of dollars to rebuild Europe. It sounded like exactly what the continent needed: support, stability, recovery. But behind that promise, a bigger question started to emerge. Was the Marshall Plan purely an act of generosity, or was it also a strategic move to shape the future of Europe? To understand this, we need to step into the world of 1945. World War II had just ended. Nazi Germany was defeated. But victory didn't mean stability. Europe was exhausted. Countries like France, Germany, and Italy faced economic collapse. Infrastructure was destroyed. Governments were weak. People were desperate. And in that kind of environment, political ideas spread quickly. One idea in particular was gaining ground: communism. In Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union was expanding its influence. Communist governments were being established, either directly or indirectly supported by Moscow. But even in Western Europe, communist parties were growing stronger, especially among workers who were frustrated and looking for change. For the United States, this was a serious concern. The world was entering what would become known as the Cold War, a global rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. It wasn't just about military power. It was about influence, ideology, and the future direction of entire regions. If Western Europe collapsed economically, it could shift politically. And that's where the Marshall Plan came in. In 1947, U.S. Secretary of State George Marshall announced a program to provide economic assistance to European countries. The idea was straightforward: help rebuild economies, restore stability, and prevent further chaos. But the scale of the plan was massive. Over the next few years, the United States provided around $13 billion in aid to Western European countries. This included money, food, fuel, machinery, and technical support. It wasn't just cash, it was a full package aimed at rebuilding entire economies. Countries like Britain, France, and West Germany became major recipients. The impact was visible. Industries began to recover. Production increased. Infrastructure was rebuilt. Trade started flowing again. Slowly but steadily, Western Europe began to stabilize. From one perspective, the Marshall Plan worked. It helped rebuild economies. It improved living conditions. It reduced the immediate risk of collapse. For many people, it was a lifeline at a time when options were limited. But there's another side to the story. The aid was not given without expectations. Countries that received Marshall Plan assistance were encouraged, and in some cases required, to align their economic policies in certain ways. This included promoting free market systems, reducing trade barriers, and increasing cooperation with other Western nations. In other words, the plan wasn't just about recovery, it was also about direction. The United States was not only helping Europe rebuild, it was helping shape how that rebuilding would happen. And this is where the debate begins. Was this simply practical, or was it a form of economic influence? Supporters argue that the conditions attached to the aid were necessary. After all, rebuilding economies requires coordination, planning, and stability. Encouraging cooperation between countries helped prevent future conflicts. Promoting open markets supported growth. From this perspective, the Marshall Plan wasn't control, it was structured recovery. But critics see it differently. They argue that the plan gave the United States significant influence over European economies. By providing aid on certain terms, the U.S. could shape policies, priorities, and long-term economic systems in the region. It also strengthened economic ties between Europe and the United States. European countries became more connected to American markets, goods, and financial systems. This created a kind of economic alignment that lasted for decades. And then there's the geopolitical angle. The Marshall Plan was offered to all European countries, including those in Eastern Europe. But the Soviet Union rejected it and pressured countries under its influence to do the same. Why? Because accepting the plan would have meant opening their economies to Western influence. As a result, Europe became more divided. Western Europe moved toward economic recovery with US support. Eastern Europe remained under Soviet influence, following a different model. This division became one of the defining features of the Cold War. So the Marshall Plan didn't just rebuild economies, it also helped draw a line across Europe, a line between two systems, one based on market economies and Western alliances, the other based on centralized control under Soviet influence. This raises an important question. If a plan helps rebuild countries but also strengthens one side of a global rivalry, is it purely aid or is it strategy? The answer depends on how you look at it. There's no doubt that the Marshall Plan had real, positive effects on Europe's recovery. Without it, rebuilding might have taken much longer, with more instability and uncertainty. At the same time, it clearly served US interests. A stable, economically strong Western Europe became a key partner for the United States, politically, economically, and strategically. It reduced the risk of communist expansion, it created markets for American goods, and it strengthened alliances that still exist today. So in reality, the Marshall Plan was both things at once. It was aid and it was strategy. That doesn't make it unique. In international politics, actions often serve multiple purposes. Helping others and advancing your own interests are not always separate. Sometimes they happen together. Looking back, the Marshall Plan is often seen as one of the most successful economic programs in history. It played a major role in rebuilding Europe and shaping the modern global economy. But it also reminds us of something important, that even acts of support can carry deeper motives, that economic help can influence political direction, and that in a world shaped by power and competition, very few decisions are made for just one reason. So when we ask whether the Marshall Plan was aid or economic control, the real answer lies somewhere in between. It was a plan that rebuilt nations while also shaping their future. And its effects are still visible today, not just in the economies it helped rebuild, but in the global balance of power it helped define.